people of Earth. Welcome to the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex, and today we are talking about Legends of Tomorrow, What We Do in the Shadows, Twilight Zone, and Doom Patrol.
So there will be spoilers throughout. You've been warned. Let's start with Week in Geek. What's been happening this week?
Well, I guess kind of the most recent thing is Emily Bett Rickards had her last day of shooting on The Arrow, which is kind of sad because she's one of my favorite characters. I know there isn't a lot of love out there for Felicity, but
It's strange to see her go rather than sad, I would say, because you'd think she'd be in kind of the show to this bitter end. But yeah, it makes sense with the 2040 stuff that nobody knows she has a kid.
I mean, it's really kind of the only way they could go because it wouldn't make sense otherwise.
What possible reasons can you think for her leaving the show, for the character leaving the show in season 7?
I'm imagining it's something like there's kind of another Diaz situation where the family is under threat, and because she's pregnant, they decided to put her into hiding instead of
witness protection or something.
Yeah, that's kind of the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I think that's pretty sound logic. I mean, let's be honest, it could be Diaz.
It could be Diaz. I mean,
the man will just not die most of the time, so who's saying this one's going to stick?
Also, the new Joker trailer came out. We wanted to talk about last week, but it hadn't actually.
I think it dropped an hour after we recorded last week, which is super goddamn annoying. You had quite a strong kind of reaction to it. I mean, let's talk about your reaction first.
I don't know if I would call it a strong reaction. I think I was just kind of disappointed by it. The Joker is my favorite villain out of all of comic book.
That's because he's the greatest villain.
He is the greatest villain, and anybody who doesn't think that
can go to hell.
Exactly. But watching this trailer, it didn't really feel like the Joker. It just kind of felt like another story about a dysfunctional white guy who slowly goes crazy. And yeah, it's set in Gotham and they call it the Joker, but it feels like they just sort of slapped the name on kind of a slightly similar storyline.
So let's say that you're making a Joker origin story, even though we both agree it doesn't necessarily need to be told. What would you have done then?
Part of the great thing about the Joker is that nobody really knows what his origin story is, and he kind of accentuates that by telling multiple different stories about his past.
What about a film where he's in a bar surrounded by other Batman Gotham villains, and he tells them 3 short stories, and each is an origin story, and they're kind of wondering which is the real one?
For a Joker origin story, I would prefer something like that, where you had multiple different possibilities and not one of them stuck out as oh yeah, this is the truth.
Or a Rashomon style thing where 3 people view the kind of moment he becomes Joker, and they've all got a different interpretation of what happened.
The Batman one.
Yeah.
With all the weird animation things. I mean, that would be cool. If you wanted to do a Joker origin film, I would say not have the Joker in it. Have a bunch of other Gotham villains in it, just kind of
talking about him,
talking about the Joker and different rumors and trying to piece together who this person is, and then kind of at the end you still don't really know.
Hollywood, we've done your job for you once again.
The Suicide Squad reboot / sequel / whatever the hell it's going to end up being. So Captain Boomerang, played by Jade Courtney, is back. I'm
disappointed to hear that, I have to admit. I wanted them to sort of scorch the earth, salt the land, and then really go. When I hear the word reboot, I really feel like you've got to commit to that. They would obviously have Margot Robbie in as Harley Quinn, but nothing else really worked for me in that film. So he, least of all, probably worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think Captain Boomerang is kind of lame. He wasn't that engaging, and I think that was part of the problem with the Suicide Squad is they picked a lot of sort of less well-known or less favorited villains, so it was kind of the B team, aside from Harley Quinn, obviously, because she's kind of up there. Deadshot isn't going to be in it, which I'm kind of glad about. Again, he's not one of my favorite villains. I think he's kind of uninteresting, but Idris Elba is going to be in it playing somebody.
Cool.
Let's talk about Legends.
Hank is dead.
Is he really?
He had his soul sucked out his mouth like a Dementor would do.
But I mean,
I have to be honest, I really like the character of Hank, even if he's kind of this, borderline, is he good, is he bad? And he's had this whole episode of reconnecting with Nate, talking about his childhood pets and all of that. I love the character of Hank. Even if he was the bad guy, I'd only want him to be locked up and not killed, but I think he was kind of, Neron didn't tell him everything. Neron's kind of sold him this idea of it's for the greater good or something, and Hank's only fault is believing this arsehole. But yeah, Hank is dead and I'm sad.
See, in this episode, I got kind of tired of them flip-flopping with Hank's character. 1 minute, he's...
We've had a couple of resolutions with Nate, haven't we?
Yeah, he bonds with Nate and they have a good relationship and this is a really heartwarming moment, and then the next scene he's conspiring to...
on his phone.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving to some person. Yeah,
every one of his interactions with Nate felt like it was out of step with what was happening in the show and what has been happening in the show.
I mean, they're both like lying to each other's faces, aren't they? Because even Nate is investigating the hell out of him with Zari behind his back. Hank's still doing all this stuff with Nero. They haven't like stopped doing what they're doing. But yeah, I don't know. His bridges were kind of being built. I think they could have had some nice resolution. But yeah, he's dead just at that kind of moment. But I think the season probably needed focus now for the final stretch of 6 episodes or something. And so they've got the focus of Neron as their kind of enemy now, even though they don't know it, because typically Nora Dark was sensed this power happening in Hank's office, burst out of her prison.
That was kind of the other thing, was like, I questioned whether or not she would go through that much effort to run out and save Hank. I mean, like, if it had been one of the legends, I could probably see that. And maybe she didn't know it was Hank specifically, maybe she was just following the energy or whatever. But for me, the amount of effort she had to put into breaking out of her cell and like running, it didn't feel like she would do that for just anybody.
And so Nate finds her over Hank's body and
typically thinks that she's killed her.
And she does this kind of awesome purple disappearing act.
So she's out in the world now.
In the wind.
Hopefully she'll meet up with the legends at some point and they'll have another fugitive on their ship.
Let's talk about relationships. 3 specifically. We've just talked about Nora, so presumably we're going to get her and Ray at some point.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I think they've
done some groundwork on that, meeting at that kind of fair.
It's not been shoehorned in. There's this kind of like back and forth and, you know, this sort of real consideration for the fact that they are actually on, or at least they were on opposite sides. Nora's kind of shifted her allegiances a bit since she's been captured. But, like, their relationship feels kind of very natural. Like, it built up slowly.
Because, I mean, he had some stuff with Damien. They had stuff together when he kind of saved her from that guy taking, like, photos of her cleavage. There's been a bit of work, and it's not being thrown on us. Yeah. Unlike Nate and Zari, which we've had 2 episodes.
And it's going to happen.
To my knowledge, before those 2 episodes, nothing was even hinted at of those 2. And these 2 episodes, he calls her babe now. His mother said she has lovely childbearing hips. This has been so forced upon us.
For me, I just find it really disappointing because I like the team of Nate and Zari. I think they make kind of a good investigative duo together. And I don't feel like it's necessary to, like, push a romance in there. I think, like, you know, just let there be good, healthy friendships between men and women because it's possible.
How dare you, sir? How dare you? There must be love everywhere all the time. Men and women being friends, not in the Arrowverse.
Like, not even close.
It's bullshit. I agree with you entirely. They would be a lovely friendship that could go off and do little skirmishes together. You know, if the team was in wherever, going off in like teams of 2, they would be great together. You know, a lovely, just friends. You know, that'd be great. But it's going to happen, and they're probably going to be brought together over Hank's death. She will hold his hand again, and they'll look lovingly into each other's eyes. Can we just talk about Nate's last, 15 episodes on the show? With Amaya, that whole thing happened. Charlie, who looks just like her, they were going to be we thought something was going to happen with them, and now it's Zari. They will not let that man not be romantically attached to somebody.
It's weird how they, certain shows have certain characters that are not allowed to ever be single, and they're just constantly paired up with different people, and after a while, you stop getting invested in who they're paired up with because, it's eventually, probably sooner rather than later, it's going to end. It's going to end dramatically and messily, and then he's going to go off in, an episode and fall in love with a completely new person.
And sometimes these shows become so goddamn incestuous because everybody's been with everybody at one point. We talk about Nora and Ray, we talk about Zari and Nate. Let's talk about the other relationship. The idea of Zari and Nate, I don't particularly like, but of all the kind of 2-episode sequences to bring it into, they've brought it in just as Sarah and Ava are kind of on the rocks, and Sarah was very vulnerable in this episode. It's clearly really got to her. She talks about the fact that it was her one chance of happiness, and in this moment of truthfulness, we'll come back to that, but she really goes off on Mona saying it's all your fault that I don't have kind of my dream woman anymore.
And she's kind of lost everything because the Time Bureau takes over the Wave Riders, so they've lost the ship. They're in an RV with a drugged President Nixon. Her and Ava are on the rocks, and as usual, she's kind of put in the position of being the fearless leader who rallies everyone together and has a plan and knows what's going on. And in this episode, she doesn't know what to do next, and that's where we get the vulnerability from. And I thought it was kind of really interesting that she confided, because, I mean, she had the kind of truth blow up at Mona, but then later on when she's apologizing, she sort of confides all of these things into Mona that she hasn't actually told
anybody, yeah.
And I just thought, like, I mean, it was kind of an interesting move because it sort of places Mona as possibly becoming a more permanent member of the Wave Rider team. And I suppose she kind of empathized because, like, through the entire episode, Mona's trying to tell her that she's a werewolf now, and Sarah keeps brushing her off. It's like, go away, go away, go away. And at the end, she's just like, oh, that's what you were trying to say.
Yeah. I just think the kind of, we're trying to be sold this new Nate-Zari relationship on the back of Sarah and Ava kind of on the rocks. And I love Sarah and Ava. You do too.
Yeah, I mean,
they're a great relationship.
They're the best relationship in the Arrowverse. I mean, they're the healthiest relationship in the Arrowverse.
Yeah. So this just isn't the time to even float the idea of Nate and Zari. You know, we want to kind of watch Sarah and Ava hopefully come back together, but that's...
Yeah, because, I mean, Ava was completely off the board for this episode and potentially future episodes because she's taken a leave of absence from the Time Bureau. Which makes me wonder if they orchestrated this whole fight because the actress needed to go off and do something else.
Maybe.
But because, I mean, it does feel very out of... I mean, we talked about this last week, that kind of Ava's reactions did not seem in character. It was kind of like she did not know who Sarah was at all in her reaction previously, where she'd been willing to kind of, like, you know, everybody's saying the Legends are off doing something crazy, and she's been willing to listen to them and be like, okay, what are you actually doing? And she just was not willing to give at all in this. So for me, it felt like they're just doing this for drama's sake. Like, there's no kind of overarching plan. If they end up breaking them up, I'm gonna be so pissed.
Yeah. Let's quickly talk a little bit about the kind of MacGuffin, the kind of the story of this episode. Mahat, the Egyptian god of lies, has taken the form of a bug, or I don't know if maybe he is a bug all the time, who knows, and he feeds on lies, and he's in 70s America, and who better to find for lies in 70s America than Richard Nixon, and suddenly spouting this truth, and who knew that a truth for Richard Nixon would have such a cataclysmic effect on the timeline. So they've got to find out why he's telling the truth, got to make him do his "I'm not a crook" speech to get the timeline back on track, and this bug happens to just bounce around into everybody's mouths at different points, so they all spout off their kind of fears they're having at the moment. That's how we find out a lot about Sarah's kind of inner turmoil. That's how we find out about Constantine, weird issues with him, Ray as well. Funniest moment was when Sarah tried to block her mouth. Don't know why I do it because it's an audio medium. Sarah tries to block her mouth and bug goes up her nose. Constantine has to keep doing this spell to keep getting the bug out of them.
Yeah, I thought the truth bug was a really interesting thing. I mean, because it was both, like, you got a lot of dark secrets out of the Legends, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, in a similar way to Doom Patrol, they are all sort of fucked up people. I don't think they're as damaged as Doom Patrol because the Arrowverse is not that dark. But yeah, you've got a bunch of misfits kind of trying to make it. So the truth bug sort of brought out all these things, but in a very comedic sort of way. Like it worked having the kind of serious.
It was a great
and funny
visual medium, and it was obviously they were saying very funny things truthfully, but just the idea of this bug in a jar and Mona puts a bloody air hole in it the size of the bug so it keeps escaping. She's lovable and a little bit dumb at times. I wonder if they're going a little bit Nora Allen with her, just a little bit too dumb, but we'll see. She's kind of a lovable.
She's kind of like a more competent Gary.
But by a nose.
Her competency is kind of more accidental than deliberate, but she succeeds more often than Gary does.
I would say she's useful, whereas Gary is entirely useless. But I don't know whether competency is something either of them really possess. They had a child. I don't know what that child would get up to. So it was a nice. It wasn't really the point of this episode. This is more about the human side and everybody's relationship issues and the relationship of Nate and Hank as well, which I haven't really talked about. We don't need to. It was quite cool seeing Neron kind of. It looked like he was sucking his soul out, but it was kind of like the life force thing that happened to Constantine back on the summer camp episode. Yeah, but I think the Neron-Constantine meeting will probably happen next episode, and then the final stretch of how we solve a problem like Neron. Are you enjoying Legends?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to enjoy Legends. Yeah. Like, it shows up, it does what it's supposed to do every week. It's kind of the most reliable of the Arrowverse shows.
Reliable's a good word, yeah.
You know what you're going to get when you go in with Legends.
It's a nice palate cleanser sometimes as well to kind of questionable narrative decisions made in like Flash or Arrow. You just get this and it's well balanced. You know what you're getting, and it's just it's a pleasant watch. Even when they do dark things, as they will probably a bit more later this season, it's always pleasant to watch. Should we talk about Doom Patrol?
Yeah, let's talk about
Doom Patrol. So my thing about Doom Patrol is whenever there's a new episode, I have like a checklist of two things. I want an absurdity of the week, and we had a street called Danny.
A genderqueer sentient street.
Big tick on my list. And secondly, I want meaningful flashbacks. And for the first time in a long time, we had some meaningful flashbacks today. Larry was part of something called the Bureau of Normalcy, which is fucking amazing. This was a win for me with this episode.
This show is so absurd, and it is absurd in exactly the best way. Like, it's so random, and you can't really predict what's going to happen because of the absurdity in it. What did you think of the like random musical number?
I actually really liked it. I liked seeing Larry happy. And I thought maybe has Danny got some kind of powers, because he wasn't, mummy Larry. He was Larry the man with skin and, in a kind of tux and stuff. And then 3/4 through the song, there was just this smash cut to him having refused to take the microphone. I loved seeing him happy. I don't know why. They're all broken people, but he's the one I most think of as possibly even like suicidal. He's so down. And just to see the actor smiling and singing along. And I mean, let's talk about the concept of Danny Street. It's for kind of like waifs and strays. The street can move itself all around the world. People can walk into it and then it will just go somewhere else. And if anybody in the Doom Patrol is kind of one of these people that's fallen through the cracks in society that needs Danny Street, it's Larry, I would have thought. And he really found a home there. And he, even at the end, when the street kind of dropped them back off at Doom Manor, you saw him kind of like singing, and it was. I liked seeing Larry happy. What did you make of?
I want Danny Street to be real, and I want to go live there.
Yeah.
First of all, we've gotten more of Larry's backstory than anybody else, and I think they're kind of setting him up to be the lead character rather than have it be an ensemble show.
I like him as the lead.
Everything they've shown of him so far, I'm really interested in and kind of invested in him, and I mean, out of all of them, he seems like the most likely to kind of get his shit together and become a leader. Like, none of the others really seem to possess those qualities. I wasn't sure about the song thing. I mean, like, it was great. It was well done. It was fun. Matt Bomer has an amazing voice. But then it was just like, it stopped, and it was just kind of like, okay, what was the point of that? Like, was it just to have a song in the middle of the show?
Yeah, I just kind of think it was to fool us, to make us think, wow, okay, this is, like, Danny Street is a place that can make the most sad of the Doom Patrol kind of feel happy and feel something, and it couldn't. He refused. I think it was just the old kind of switcheroo to kind of fool us and break our hearts that he couldn't muster the courage to go and sing.
We had a new personality from Jane, Karen, who's like scary Stepford stalker person who has the ability to make people love her. Wasn't as invested in that. Like, I would have rather just had completely like the Danny Street story and focused on what they were doing there. 'Cause, I mean, the Karen storyline was actually pretty typical.
Yeah, I didn't like the Karen storyline at all. We don't need a different persona every week for the Jane story. We got the Karen persona because that's the character she goes to her absolute lowest ebb, apparently. And she makes this guy fall in love with her and his family, kind of be very approval of the marriage. And then she kind of had this breakdown again, and now no persona is manifesting itself in Jane. So I think next week we're going to kind of get a deep dive into her issues and her backstory even more. But yeah, no, Danny Street was the story this week, and I really enjoyed it. I like the character of Agent Wilson. He's the person that originally found Danny Street, and Danny Street's been on the run ever since. That was more where my interest was this week, yeah.
For me, when he decided to leave Danny Street to like protect it, that was kind of like the most heartbreaking moment. I was just like, no, and I was so happy that like the street was like, no, we're not going to do this, because I just thought like it would have been such a depressing ending for him that he had to like give up all of this stuff and go back to the Bureau of Normalcy and kind of hide who he was. And it's kind of one of the cool things about the Doom Patrol is that they very easily just sort of slip in queer issues and talk about them and make them sort of central without kind of being preachy or anything. Just kind of like they normalize it, which is just really nice to see, like people like you struggling with similar issues.
So Agent Wilson became, was it morally corrupt?
Morally corrupt.
And that was his kind of persona. And when he was part of the Bureau of Normalcy, he had a partner called Darren. And Darren kind of sent him into Danny Street to kind of, see what it was about, because they wanted to like bring it down or something. Because, I mean, what was the Bureau of Normalcy? It was to get rid of aberrations and abnormalities.
Yeah, I think they just wanted to, like, get rid of Denny Street because, you know, it was a bunch of non-normal people sort of celebrating the fact that they're not normal, and Bureau of Normalcy just kind of gets rid of anything that sort of strays outside of the prescribed lines.
Yeah, and so when the street kind of moved, Darren and his whole like group of soldiers were outside that were about to kind of go in, and I don't know what they were planning on doing, like kind of shooting everyone or something. We find that Darren's been chasing this street kind of around the world ever since. And at the very end, when the two had this confrontation, that was quite powerful. Darren's quite like a bigoted individual, and he said some terrible things and got his ass kicked, which was fun to watch. And yeah, it was just that moment of, shall I run and let the street kind of, because what was the street's whole thing was that it needed people, and the cabaret needed to run
that's why,
all the way through.
They had to keep the party going, because it reminded me a bit of like American Gods and kind of the idea that the gods only exist as much as people believe in them, and that's kind of like they do better the more people believe in them. And it sort of seemed like Danny had a similar thing, that as long as people were in them and like celebrating and basically having a party, that kind of energized them into and gave them like the ability to kind of create this sort of utopian.
Yeah, and so Darren getting like his ass kicked was a really powerful moment. It was kind of a message about what this show's about, I think, you know. Yeah, I liked it when Larry said, you know, he knew that they were from the Bureau of Normalcy. And his flashbacks this week about the fact that he was offered a place, I think, in the 60s to be part of the Bureau of Normalcy. And he's been on the Bureau of Normalcy's list ever since. He beats up Darren.
Well, he wasn't really offered. He was kind of kidnapped after the accident and experimented on.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
It wasn't really like, hey, you should come join us. It was like, we're going to put you in a cage, and because like they put him in like extreme cold, extreme heat. They like electrocuted him. They just did all sorts of shit to him.
He just says, tell them Captain Trainer says hello, because he's obviously on their list of people they want to rub out as well. But yeah, just a really good episode. Fucking crazy stuff happening. But yeah, that's kind of what I want from this show.
Just to go back, at the end, when Larry was like, you know, this isn't going to happen, it was kind of the first time that Larry himself did something kind of heroic. Every time previously, it's been the kind of blue energy thing that's sort of like stepped in and taken over and been like, no, we are going to help people. But this is the first time that Larry has just kind of stood up for something.
Cool. Should we talk about what we do in the shadows? This was my absolute favourite thing last week, and I was pretty disappointed in this week's episode. I think it was that thing where when a pilot episode sometimes is made, it will be made and it'll be written and it'll be rewritten and it'll be written again, and it'll be shown to like a TV company, they'll ask you to rewrite it, and it'll be so polished, this perfect polished jewel, that when it's shown to people, they'll say, yeah, okay, we'll commission you for a series. And there's often a big gap between the pilot being filmed and the rest of the series being filmed, and the polished pilot was so good. I really enjoyed it, and it was kind of 9s across the board, when the second episode was kind of 6s at best across the board. It was disappointing. Still enjoyable, but I just think the standard went off a cliff this week, and yeah, I was kind of gutted.
Yeah, I had a completely different interpretation. It was like the first episode I didn't think was overly amazing or great. It was just kind of okay. It didn't have much of a story. It was basically just kind of like this introduction of like, okay, these are who these people are, and there wasn't really much to it beyond that. So I kind of went away thinking, okay, well, that was alright, but you know, I'm not kind of dying to see the next episode. This episode I thought was much more well structured and thought out. There was actually a story to it. It had a little bit of a plot arc. You got a bit more of the characters actually doing rather than talking to the camera about stuff, which I enjoyed. I mean, again, it's still not like something that like I'm waiting in anticipation of the next episode, but it's like an enjoyable half hour, just a little bit funny, but I didn't think either one of the episodes was anything to write home about.
We didn't talk about it last week, but I really like the theme song, You're Dead by Norma Tanega, and accompanied by all the pictures of them like through the ages.
Yeah, I mean, the theme song is pretty good.
Just some of the bits I didn't find funny this week. They did the whole LARPing virgins thing again, which we did that last week, and that was a whole big part of this episode as well.
They even used the same virgins that were brought for the Baron, like the Gin Elf was in it again.
Yeah, that was disappointing. They had this weird group of talking heads in the middle about what they'd change if like vampires took over the world, and one was like a ban on turtlenecks, which isn't funny. One was free compulsory harpsichord concerts, which wasn't funny. Just in general, I would say the standard of jokes went off a cliff this week. I think I laughed like twice in this episode, maybe, and they weren't particularly like big laughs. First episode, I was like really cracking up. Things I liked this week, Laszlo meets a member of the city council and asks, he offers to like kill her enemies because they're trying to get in good favour with them. And she says, the raccoon population around here is kind of growing. And so the next day she opens her door and there's like this stack of dead raccoons outside her house, which it was pretty good. Trying to get in with another of the city councillors, Doug Peterson, and him just going, I call out to you through the ether, Doug Peterson, can you hear me, Doug? And Doug is like sitting in his lit sitting room and he goes, I can hear you. And you just hear Nando going, great, hi Doug. And that was good. But yeah, I think there were just generally less funny things in this, and they weren't as funny, so it was a shame. The thing that is working for me in both episodes is Colin Robinson, weirdly. The energy vampire.
For me, the episodes rank kind of closer than they do for you.
Yeah.
Like, I would say probably maybe about a 7 for each of them. Neither one of them did I ever have any laugh out loud moments. I didn't see as big of a divide between the two episodes.
Yeah, I'll keep watching. Let's move on at this point to the Twilight Zone, which I think was my favourite of the week. I had no idea John Lithgow. I always think about the Shatner version.
See, I always think about the Lithgow version. I'd actually forgotten that Shatner did, like, the original one.
I had no idea Lithgow done one in 1983, and considering I proclaimed it to be International John Lithgow Appreciation Day on Friday, I feel like a prize arsehole. And a certain person on Twitter has not let me forget it. I really enjoyed it. This isn't a kind of redo, this is kind of a reimagining. It's very different from the original.
I went in sort of expecting something closer to the original, and so it took me a little while to kind of get on board with the new thing and see where it was going. It's a completely different take on the other 3 incarnations of the story, from like the original short story, the Shatner version, and the Lithgow version. They all sort of focused on characters that had some sort of mental health issue. One was an alcoholic, or kind of just like an addict in general. One had a breakdown, and I forget what the other one was. But the story sort of focused on the isolation and hopelessness of being stuck in a fear and not having anybody listen to you, whereas in this one, the protagonist, Justin Sands, he's kind of the architect of, like, rather than there being kind of a gremlin on the plane, he is the gremlin, and the plane crashes because of him, and then ultimately, like, they end up stoning him to death.
I like that this is made me feel like those time travel stories when you don't know whether if you act it makes the thing happen, if you don't act it makes the thing happen. I like that he thought up until the very final moment that he was saving these people, and this is all of the stories, they're about unreliable, kind of, to me it's about like unreliable narrators, because they've all had breakdowns, or they've all had, one's an addict, and so his kind of perception can be changed due to his like addiction, and people around them kind of don't believe them. Like, I think, didn't this guy have a phone call with his wife when he was in the airport about his breakdown? Did. And so from the first minute we're told these people are unreliable narrators. We don't know whether this podcast is even real, where it's like a figment of his imagination.
Yeah, because he never actually plays it for anybody. I mean, like,
which is fucking ridiculous.
He tries to like,
that guy just,
the guy sitting next to him, but then after that he doesn't try ever again, and nobody else is like, okay, let me listen to this podcast and hear what you're hearing. So we are never really sure whether it's in his head or it is actually a real thing.
And kind of like with the gremlin, until the plane lands and you see part of the like a wing has actually been peeled up, we know that these people are telling the truth. And I think it's just a 21st century idea of a different way of making an unreliable narrator, and his investigatory mind, just, he had to see that there was a story here. He had to like dig and delve, and he was like scanning around, like seeing who the people were and if they kind of fit in with the story he was being told. And he was the architect of his own downfall. A couple of questions. Did we need the island section?
It's a good question, actually.
Thank you very much.
I think we do, because otherwise the story wasn't going anywhere. You would just have this story about a guy kind of spiraling, and then the plane crash, and then it would have just been like, okay, what was that for? But having the island thing with the news report saying all of the passengers were rescued except for one who is still missing, and to see that, like, he's missing because the other passengers killed him.
Yeah.
that was probably the only way they could have resolved this particular story, I think.
I want to say, like, something very unhelpful. You know when we were watching American Horror Story?
Yeah.
And horror, we don't really think it's horror anyway. It's kind of more of a creepy kind of thing. I've got more enjoyment in the family of emotions that you might get from horror or creepy things in these two episodes, and I probably did in the whole of American Horror Story Apocalypse. I have to say, I really enjoyed this episode, just first and foremost. I was kind of enthralled, I have to be honest, and I felt quite invested. And so throughout the whole thing, I'm trying to like think about what I would do in the same situation, and I'm enjoying, as a general thought, I'm really enjoying the Twilight Zone, these two episodes. I thought the second was way better than the first.
I think I enjoyed the first episode more than this one, but there is just kind of an overall creepy feeling to everything that happens in these Twilight Zone episodes. So they've done a really good job of maintaining the atmosphere and ambience that goes along with the Twilight Zone.
It's very clean, isn't it? It's very one idea, and you revolve the entire world around this one idea. No overcomplications, no frills. Let's just focus on these stories that have lasted, like over 50 years. Let's give them maybe little modern tweaks, but it's simple storytelling. That's why it works.
The Twilight Zone doesn't really use like tricks or gimmicks. They just kind of sit down to tell a story, and presenting it in a way that is very unemotional aids in that sort of creepy feeling. So you don't have like a bunch of music or jump scares or anything trying to like make you feel scared. You just have this kind of very consistent feeling of unease through the whole thing, and that just works.
I think also that creepiness lives in confined spaces. And I think a story told on a plane, I'm trying to think of other ones I've seen, like Flight Plan, Red Eye. I just think it's a great location. Having like a kind of almost like a bottle episode for the Twilight Zone is a good fit, I think.
Yeah, and I think particularly with airplanes, because
a line in it like, with 30,000 feet up, humans weren't supposed to be up here, didn't someone say in this episode? Yeah. And it's so true, isn't it?
It's an area where I think most of us feel a little bit unsettled about plane travel, but there's always this sort of kind of uncertainty, and you have to put an awful lot of faith into like a machine and the pilots, and just kind of pretend that you aren't doing this completely ridiculous thing by floating in the 30,000 feet in the air.
Yeah. It's a little bit dark to say, but we live in a time where airplanes are disappearing.
Yeah. Frequently.
So I'd agree with all of that. One other question quickly. Shared universe? Because the magazine stand, the guy from first episode was in the magazine above, here's one. Supposedly the person from episode 3 was in the magazine below, here's one. It's going to take place in a shared universe. Is this the Marvel Cinematic Universe effect?
I think it's just kind of a cool thing to because obviously they're all sort of linked by Jordan Peele's narrator. I really loved the original series, so seeing it remade so well is just like really exciting. I think you would expect, kind of like Black Mirror, that everything is in Twilight Zone, it's all kind of in a shared universe, kind of connected together, and doesn't necessarily have to be anything more overt than like the pictures on the magazines, just these kind of like small little threads that connect them all.
Final question, do we want to speculate about what the podcast actually was, or should we just let that lie? Because was it in his head? Was it...
I don't know. It could be anything, because it's never cleared up from us, and he's the only one who listens to this.
Some of the things when it was said in the podcast happened before they happened, and sometimes it was after they happened, so it was difficult to think it was all in his head, because he wouldn't have been able to predict the bird hitting. But it's just those thinkers that
that's kind of part of the magic of the Twilight Zone, is they don't, and it's I think probably a problem with modern horror is
we need all the answers.
Horror works best when you don't have all the answers.
Absolutely. And the Twilight Zone original series, you'd often get a little sprinkling of the supernatural, something that wasn't unexplainable, something that wasn't explainable, and it's good to have that, I think. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have. I'm going to quickly read out a couple of poll results. I asked people whether they thought Avengers will hit 2.5 billion at the box office. 89% of the vote said yes. That was 82 votes. I then asked what April means to people in the geekyverse. Game of Thrones, Avengers Endgame, both or neither, with 44% of the vote Avengers Endgame led. I thought both might actually be the top
I'm surprised that both didn't kind of come out.
Both was second with 27 and Game of Thrones was third with 18. So finally, this is more like a podcaster question. I said to people, I've just seen on Podbean Analytics that someone has started our podcast from the beginning. Our poor audio beginning. Does anyone else worry whether early low quality may turn people off? 99 votes. 80% of people said yes. So I'm glad I'm not the only person that kind of has those kind of fears, but our audio's better now, and let's just move on. We can be found on Twitter at GeekNerdPod, on Facebook /The Geekly. We have a Patreon.
Geek Nerd Podcasts.
Yeah, our t-shirts are like ready and printed now, and they're going to be kind of going up at some point for people to look at.